The strange familiarity. There's something unsettling about the people who affect you the most. It's not always what they do. Sometimes it's how quickly they get under your skin. You meet someone, and almost instantly, there's a reaction. Not always obvious, not always explosive, but something shifts inside you. A tension, a pull, a quiet discomfort you can't fully explain. And then, almost without noticing, you label it. Narcissist. But what if that reaction isn't just about them? What if it's also about you? Carl Jung once explored an idea that feels uncomfortable at first. We don't only react to others for who they are, but for what they reflect back to us. And that's where things begin to get complicated, because the people we strongly reject often carry traits we don't want to see in ourselves, not necessarily in the same form, not in the same intensity, but in some hidden, unexamined way. This doesn't mean you are like them, but it might mean you recognize something. Think about it. Why do some people barely affect you, while others stay in your mind for days? Why do certain personalities irritate you instantly, while others with similar traits don't? It's not random, there's a pattern. Jung described this as part of the shadow, the side of ourselves we prefer not to face, the traits we suppress, deny, or push away over time. And when we encounter those traits in someone else, the reaction can be immediate and intense. Not because they're simply bad, but because they feel familiar in a way we don't want to admit. And that's the part no one likes to talk about, because it's easier to believe that narcissism is something external, something out there, something that belongs only to other people. But what if the story is more personal than that? Before you scroll away or dismiss this idea, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might not only see narcissism differently, you might see yourself differently too. The mask we all wear. Let's be honest for a moment. Everyone at some level wants to be seen, to be valued, to matter. There's nothing wrong with that. But where does that desire cross the line? Where does self-worth turn into something else? Jung didn't define narcissism the way it's often thrown around today, not as a label to attack others, but as something rooted in the structure of the human psyche, a distortion, a defense, sometimes even a wound. Because behind exaggerated confidence, there's often something fragile, something that needed protection. And over time, that protection becomes a mask, a carefully built identity designed to control how others see you, to avoid rejection, to avoid feeling small. Now here's the uncomfortable part. That mask isn't exclusive to narcissists. We all wear versions of it. Think about the moments when you tried to appear stronger than you felt, more confident than you were, more in control than you actually were inside. That's not weakness, that's human. But the difference lies in awareness. Some people recognize the mask and slowly learn to take it off. Others become it, completely. And when you encounter someone who is deeply identified with that mask, something in you reacts. Because on some level you know the feeling. You've worn a version of it too. Not to manipulate, not to control, but to protect. And that's why the reaction isn't always simple anger. Sometimes it's discomfort, sometimes it's confusion, and sometimes, it's recognition. Jung believed that understanding others begins with understanding ourselves. Not judging, not labeling, but observing. So instead of asking, why are they like that? A better question might be, what is this bringing up in me? That question changes everything. And it leads us deeper into something most people avoid. The shadow. The shadow you don't want to see. The shadow isn't what most people think. It's not just darkness. It's not just bad traits. It's everything you've pushed away over time. The parts of you that didn't fit, that weren't accepted, that you learned to hide. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the desire to be admired. Maybe it was the need to feel important. So you buried it. You became the opposite of it. But buried doesn't mean gone. It stays. Quiet, unseen, but active. Jung believed that what we don't face within ourselves doesn't disappear. It gets projected outward. And that's where things get interesting. Because when you encounter someone who openly expresses traits you've suppressed, the reaction can be intense. Not because they're doing something unfamiliar, but because they're expressing something you've learned to deny. That doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it explains the emotional charge, why it feels personal, why it lingers. You're not just reacting to them. You're reacting to the collision between who you are and who you refuse to be. And that's not easy to sit with. Most people don't. They stay on the surface, they label, they move on. But if you stay a little longer with that discomfort, something shifts. You begin to see patterns, you begin to understand that your reactions are not random, they're meaningful, they're pointing somewhere. And this is where awareness begins, not by denying what you feel, but by questioning it. Because the goal isn't to blame yourself, it's to understand yourself. And once you do that, your relationship with people, including narcissistic personalities, starts to change. Not because they change, but because you do. Why they still affect you? If you truly didn't care, they wouldn't affect you at all. That's something most people don't want to hear, because it's easier to say, they're the problem, and sometimes they are. But that's not the whole story. The real question is, why do they still have power over your attention? Why do they stay in your thoughts long after the interaction ends? Jung would suggest that emotional intensity is rarely accidental. It points to something unresolved, something within you that hasn't been fully understood. Because when you become aware of your own patterns, something interesting happens. You stop being pulled in the same way. You still see the behavior. You still recognize it. But it doesn't hook you. It doesn't consume your mental space, and that's not indifference, that's clarity. Many people think healing means becoming unaffected by everything, but that's not realistic. What changes is not your ability to feel. It's your ability to understand what you're feeling. And when you understand it, you don't react the same way. You respond differently, more consciously, more intentionally. And slowly, the dynamic shifts. Not because the world changed, but because your perception did. Jung emphasized that awareness is what breaks unconscious patterns, and without awareness, we repeat the same emotional cycles with different people. So if you keep encountering the same type of person, it might not be coincidence, it might be a pattern waiting to be understood. And once you see it clearly, you're no longer caught inside it. Recognition changes everything. At the beginning, we said something uncomfortable. You don't hate narcissists, you recognize them. Now that idea probably feels different, not because it excuses anything, but because it reveals something deeper. Recognition is not about similarity in behavior. It's about connection at the level of the psyche. You recognize the mask, you recognize the defense, you recognize the need behind it. Because in some way, you've felt it too. And that changes how you see things. Not softer, not naive, just clearer. Jung believed that real growth begins when we stop dividing the world into us and them. When we stop pretending that everything we reject exists only outside of us. Because the more you deny your own shadow, the more power it has over you. But when you face it, something shifts. You become less reactive, less triggered, less controlled by what others do. Not because people change, but because you understand yourself more deeply, and that's where real freedom begins. So the next time you feel that strong reaction, pause. Not to judge yourself, but to observe. Ask yourself, what am I really seeing here? Because the answer might not just be about them, it might be about you. And that's not something to fear. That's something that can change everything. If this made you think in a different way, I'd be curious to know, what part stayed with you the most? And if you want more videos like this, exploring the hidden patterns behind human behavior, you're welcome to stay. There's a lot more beneath the surface.